Cersei stood before the window of her solar, eyes fixed upon the sprawl of King's Landing below. Candlelight flickered within the room, lending her reflection a ghostly pallor in the glass. She drew a soft breath, every ounce of her posture rigid with thought and resolve. Night's shadows crept along the walls as the day's last light dimmed over the Red Keep. But for Cersei, the hour had barely begun. The game was always in motion, only the naive believed it paused for the dark. She had spent days, indeed many years, contemplating how best to entrench House Lannister's power. Now that her father was gone, taken by a cruel twist of fate and the treachery of an unexpected assassin, she was left to defend her children's future with the cunning he had bequeathed her. Tywin Lannister had tutored her well, instilling in her the subtlety of politics, the value of forging alliances, and the absolute importance of crushing potential threats. So many houses circled the Iron Throne like wolves with bared teeth. The North was in chaos, the Vale was quiet but ever watchful, and the Riverlands had endured too many ravages of war to muster immediate ambition. But the Reach, fertile, wealthy, and led by House Tyrell, remained a looming presence, its power all the more menacing because Margaery was already enmeshed with the royal family. Margaery, who fancied herself the future queen, doted on Tommen with her sweet smiles and gentle coaxings. Cersei saw clearly that House Tyrell took their role as providers of bread and gardens not simply as a means to feed the realm, but as a means to eventually overtake the realm. She loathed the idea of letting the Tyrells tighten their grip. Dorne was a different matter altogether. Almost isolated at the southern tip of Westeros, sun-scorched and defiant, Dorne had seldom allied closely with the Iron Throne, save in times of strategic marriages that came and went. The Martells seethed over Oberyn's death in the capital. They despised the Lannisters on a visceral level, and yet, every time Cersei measured Dorne's hatred, she found it to be something she might shape. Hate, after all, could be molded if one gave it the right target and enough reason to redirect. She recognized, with a clarity inherited from her father, that she could draw Dorne to her side if she offered them something worth more than vengeance. The notion had been budding in her mind for weeks, an audacious plan that would have startled even Tywin had he been alive. In a single maneuver, she could diminish the Tyrell threat, appease Dorne's appetite for justice and influence, and secure House Lannister's hold on the realm. It would not be cheap, for they would demand something substantial in return, perhaps a marriage, perhaps land, or both. But what was a high cost to others if it saved her from the slow, smothering coil of the Tyrells? She heard footsteps approaching. Her posture remained the same, though every muscle tensed in anticipation. Kevan Lannister's measured tread, or perhaps Pycelle's shuffling step. Even Qyburn's light footfall was possible. For a fleeting instant, she wondered which sycophant or relative wanted an audience now. The door opened with a low groan, and the guard announced Lord Qyburn. Of course, the man stepped inside with a curious, respectful tilt of his head, a ghost of a smile on his thin lips. He'd brought her the letters from Dorne earlier that week, cloaked in secrecy, sealed with Martell sigils, bearing subtle demands that she had read over many times. "Your Grace," Qyburn said quietly, folding his hands before him. Cersei watched him in the reflection of the glass. She admired his cunning, if not always the way he dabbled in the macabre. "Any news from the south?" she asked, her voice low and precise. Qyburn inclined his head. "I have received another message from our contact in Dorne. Prince Doran seems open to the arrangement, though he will insist upon certain conditions." Cersei traced a single finger along the windowsill. Conditions? Of course. In matters of alliance, Doran Martell would want enough to satisfy the thirst for Martell power, to gain a step up in the perpetual dance of houses. What did he say? Qyburn withdrew a small rolled parchment, sealed and accompanied by a faint tang of exotic spices, as if the letter had soaked in the Dornish sun. "He speaks of a union, a marriage that would bind our houses in private at first, so as not to stir the Tyrells into immediate alarm. He also insists that justice be served for Oberyn's death. He claims that if the Tyrells felt the weight of suspicion for the Red Viper's demise, that might soothe the Martell outrage at our house." Cersei's heart flickered with triumph. Prince Doran was cunning but might be guided into believing carefully constructed illusions. If they could place the blame on House Tyrell, twist the narrative so that Oberyn's death, while a trial by combat, was orchestrated behind the scenes by the Tyrells, it would be a blow that House Martell would savor. It wouldn't be easy, but illusions never were. And who would they propose for this marriage? Trystane Martell, your grace, Qyburn said. He is young and not without sympathy among his people. They would see it as securing the future of House Martell in alliance with the Iron Throne. In some capacity. Cersei spun from the window, her gaze direct. My daughter is already in Dorne, betrothed to Trystane. Should we proceed along that route? Qyburn interrupted softly. Your daughter, Princess Myrcella, is indeed betrothed, but Prince Doran suggests an even deeper bond, beyond the formal arrangement already in place. Perhaps a double-blind arrangement, something that cements loyalty. It may involve more than a single marriage. Cersei's lips parted. Her mind whirred. A second marriage? Tommen was quite young, yet he was already wed to Margaery Tyrell in name. That union was the foundation of the Tyrell influence at King's Landing. Breaking that would be complicated, but perhaps there were other ways. In the swirl of court gossip and the complexities of inheritance, new possibilities sprang to mind. She folded her arms, ignoring the slight chill of the night. I must consider many angles. Speak to Prince Doran's messenger again, quietly. Let him know we are prepared to do what must be done, and that the Tyrells will be implicated. We'll see how he responds. Qyburn bowed. I shall do so at once, your grace. Alone again, Cersei took a moment to steady herself. The burden of forging alliances in the aftermath of war was immense, but so was the opportunity. House Tyrell had grown complacent, expecting their wealth and breadbasket to enthrall the Lannisters. But should Dorne rise at her side, covertly at first, they might find themselves outmaneuvered. And in doing so, Cersei would accomplish what her father once dreamed of, an unbreakable hold on the Iron Throne for her children. She turned to her table, her gaze alighting on a piece of parchment. She would write to Myrcella, carefully, secretly. She would insist upon her absolute discretion. Though she hated the notion of her sweet daughter being tangled in new webs, no other path lay open. If Myrcella played her role well, the entire realm would belong to her brothers one day. The silent corridors of Sunspear were lit with the glow of flickering torches. The air smelled of heated stone, salt from the sea carried inland on balmy breezes. Prince Doran Martell, seated in his wheeled chair, turned carefully down one corridor where Ellaria Sand waited with quiet, graceful patience. The woman's face was a tapestry of sorrow, memory, and gentle cunning. She had lost Oberyn, but she remained a woman unbroken, a woman who yearned for justice on behalf of their fallen prince. Ellaria offered a respectful nod, stepping aside so that Doran's attendant could guide him into the room. Soft tapestries of Dornish red and gold draped the walls. Within, a man wearing the colors of House Martell stood stiff-backed, as if anticipating a meeting of the utmost gravity. He bowed deeply to Prince Doran. My prince, he said, the letter from King's Landing has arrived. Doran let his eyes linger a moment on the messenger. And the contents? A flicker of dryness passed across the messenger's face. Queen Regent Cersei is receptive, perhaps more than we anticipated. She speaks of further implicating House Tyrell, behind closed doors, of course. She will give Dorne certain benefits in exchange. I do not know the specifics, only that she insists on a strong alliance, binding the Martells and Lannisters in a marriage arrangement that will be quite unexpected. At that, Ellaria stepped forward, her eyes dark with emotion. Unexpected indeed. Still, can we trust her? It was House Lannister that saw Oberyn's death, not the Tyrells. Doran raised a hand, as if to quell her anger. I do not trust her, Ellaria, but I know the ways of the game. If Cersei desires to shift blame onto the Tyrells, it means she needs us. And if she needs us, we have leverage. I will not let Oberyn's death be in vain. He inclined his head to the messenger, who passed a sealed parchment forward. Doran broke the seal and read swiftly. his dark eyebrows lifting in surprise. Then he offered the parchment to Ilaria, that she might see the words penned by Qyburn's careful hand in the name of the Queen Regent. As Ilaria's gaze scanned the letter, her breath caught. It seems she promises to reward us with the continued autonomy of Dorne, the official removal of all suspicion from Oberyn's attempt to champion Tyrion Lannister in that ill-fated trial, and the condemnation of House Tyrell's involvement. She suggests that she has proof that Mace Tyrell orchestrated something behind the scenes. She likely fabricates such proof, Doran said with a soft, bitter smile. But if she can convince the realm of the lie, then it might suffice for our vengeance. He paused, letting the words sink into the hush of the chamber. I must decide carefully. If I align with Cersei, we set Dorne on a path that merges our future with House Lannister. But the potential gain is considerable. He thought of Myrcella Baratheon, under his wardship here in Sunspear, betrothed to Trystane, a golden-haired princess who seemed far more innocent than her mother. She was kind from what he understood. Perhaps that kindness might be the key. We will continue these discussions and push for favorable terms, he said at last. If Cersei wants us badly enough, she will yield to our demands. I want to ensure that if we do agree to a formal union, Trystane's position is secured, and that Dorne will stand equal to the other great realms. No, not merely equal, respected. Feared, if need be. Ilaria exhaled softly, setting the parchment aside. For Oberyn, she murmured, as if to remind them both of the cause. Then she looked to Doran. For Dorne. Doran nodded. For Oberyn, for Dorne, and for the Martell name. Let us see how far we can turn Cersei's desperation to our advantage. In King's Landing, the dawn sun spilled gold across the Red Keep's courtyard as Loras Tyrell carefully assisted his sister Margaery down from a litter. Margaery's dark curls seemed to catch a halo of light in the early morning rays, and she smiled serenely at the small crowd of onlookers. It was an effortless act. The sweet, beloved queen, gracious to her people. Only Loras sensed the tension coiled behind her eyes. She was quite aware that Cersei was no ally. Each day, Margaery gleaned from the court gossips that the Queen Mother had sharpened her claws. Something had changed. Rumors of secret correspondences, of hushed audiences that barred even the Tyrell guards, floated through the corridors. Margaery did not like secrets. They rarely boded well for her family. She paused, lifting her skirts so that she might walk gracefully into the keep. "Brother," she said quietly, "have you spoken to your sources in the castle?" Loras inclined his head. "They whisper that Qyburn has been receiving missives from Sunspear. Dornish riders come and go at odd hours." Margaery's features remained serene as she greeted an old courtier passing by, bestowing upon him a radiant smile. But within her mind whirred. Dorne? House Martell had refused open alliances in the wake of Oberyn's death, blaming the Lannisters and the mountain that rides. For them to speak with Cersei behind closed doors was suspicious in the extreme. She pressed her lips together, mindful of the watchful eyes around her. "Find out more," she murmured to Loras, who nodded with a determined glint. Then, like an actress shifting scenes, she turned to greet the guard at the main doors. "Thank you," she said gently. "You must be weary after the night watch." The guard blinked in gratitude. Margaery swept inside, the marbled halls spreading before her. She had an audience with Cersei soon, some matter of wedding finances or a festival to celebrate Tommen's next name day. The Queen Mother was ever so fond of limiting Margaery's authority. If only she could glean the truth behind these Dornish correspondences before stepping into the Viper's den. As the Tyrell siblings ascended the steps, their mother, Olenna Tyrell, the formidable Queen of Thorns, intercepted them. She wore her signature bonnet and carried herself with a combination of sternness and wit, though the wrinkles around her eyes deepened with the stress of constant vigilance. "Margaery Loras," Olenna said in a low tone as they reached the top of the steps. "I hear unsavory talk from the kitchens. Someone says the Lannisters plan to meet with Dorne. Unofficially, of course." She let her meaning hang in the still air. Margaery nodded, measuring her mother's expression. "We suspect the same." But for what purpose? Olenna let out a frustrated hiss, adjusting the folds of her attire. It's Cersei. She hates that our position in the capital has grown. She'll do anything to cut us off at the roots, especially if she can do so with someone else's dagger. Keep your ears open. And Marjorie, do not let that woman corner you without me or Loras present. She's far too dangerous to trust alone. Marjorie gave a gentle, reassuring smile. Worry not, grandmother. I will be careful. Yet as she proceeded toward the audience chamber, a cold sliver of apprehension twisted within her. Cersei was cunning. She had been quieter than usual, biding her time. The Tyrells had to be vigilant lest they find themselves outmaneuvered. Marjorie imagined that the Tyrell gardens in Highgarden, for all their lushness, could be set ablaze if Cersei so wished. She entered the chamber, and sure enough, Cersei waited inside, perched upon a lesser throne. The regal seat was ornamented with golden lions, and behind her stood members of the Kingsguard in pristine white cloaks. Tommen was nowhere to be seen. Indeed, he had been absent from these sorts of meetings more often, leaving the ruling to his mother. It was a precarious balance, that of a child king overshadowed by a lioness regent. Cersei's gaze settled upon Marjorie with an air of mild condescension, as though the younger queen were an annoyance. "Good morning, Marjorie. Shall we discuss the upcoming festivities for King Tommen's name day?" Marjorie curtsied and approached, adopting her warmest smile. "As you wish, my lady. The people look forward to it." "Indeed," Cersei replied lightly, though her eyes were cold. "I've been considering how best to celebrate. Perhaps we should limit the extravagance. Given the conflicts of the past few years, we wouldn't want to flaunt our wealth to the small folk." Marjorie inclined her head, choosing her words carefully. "Your compassion is well noted, yet a celebration might lift their spirits. Remind them that King Tommen cares for the realm's well-being." Cersei took a slow breath, as if evaluating Marjorie's response for subtext. A sensible suggestion, but let us not dwell on trivialities too long. After all, we have more pressing matters at hand. Marjorie's heartbeat quickened, but her outward composure never faltered. Such as? Cersei lifted her chin, the gold of her hair gleaming in the torchlight. "Ensuring the security of the crown's alliances. The realm needs stability, don't you agree?" "Certainly," Marjorie answered, voice demure. "Yes, stability," Cersei echoed, and Marjorie wondered if her next words would drip with insinuation. "We must be vigilant that no house grows too ambitious. We must remind them all that House Lannister stands firm." Marjorie took the bait. "Indeed, the realm is fortunate to have such steadfast leadership," she said, forcing a bit more sweetness into her tone than she felt. Cersei's mouth curved in a small, thin smile. She tapped her fingers on the arm of the throne. "Well, that will be all for now. I only wanted your input on the festival. I shall consider your points." She gestured for a dismissal. "You may go." The abruptness of the audience's end caught Marjorie off guard. She curtsied again. "Of course, your grace." Then she turned and departed, mind churning with suspicion. Something about the whole exchange felt like a shallow performance on Cersei's part. She was pushing Marjorie away from the heart of the matter, no doubt. Perhaps there was reason for Marjorie to fear the worst. She exited to find Loras waiting near the pillars. He gave her a questioning glance, and she merely shook her head. "She scarcely discussed a thing of real import," she said softly. "Which, I suspect, means much is happening behind closed doors." "Then we must find out," Loras said, matching her quiet tone. "I'll speak to Bronn. He might know a guard or two willing to talk. There's always someone in the Red Keep with a loose tongue if you know how to pry." Marjorie nodded in agreement. "Yes, and I will speak with grandmother. We cannot let Cersei isolate us while she works her plots in secret." Her eyes narrowed. "We Tyrells must remain united. If something is brewing with Dorne, we need to know before the tide turns against us." Days stretched into a fortnight, and the hush surrounding Dorne's dealings with the crown only thickened. Cersei moved through the Red Keep with a new energy, a a certain edge that caused servants and courtiers to whisper among themselves. Rumor had it she spent late nights in closed-door meetings with Qyburn, with ravens flying out at dawn from the rookery. Within her private chambers, she penned letters in a sharp, slanting script. The letters to Myrcella were the hardest to write, asking her sweet daughter to listen to Prince Doran, to hint that the Tyrells were responsible for Oberyn's fate, to sow suspicion in the minds of Sunspear's courtiers. Myrcella was innocent, but if schooled properly, she could become a subtle agent of Lannister will. Cersei's pen scratched across the parchment as she outlined her instructions. Myrcella, sweet girl, remember that Dorne is your home for now, but you are a lion at heart. Observe their customs, win their favor, speak kindly of our house, yet confide in Trystane the insinuations about the Tyrells. Trust in Prince Doran's wisdom, for he knows how best to protect you, and how best to expose our enemies. She let a drop of candle wax fall, pressed the Lannister seal, and summoned a discreet handmaiden to deliver it to the rookery. This was the game she played, feeding illusions, shaping destinies with carefully chosen words. Later that evening, she met with Qyburn in the royal library, behind towering shelves of dusty tomes. Qyburn's dark eyes gleamed in the lamplight, as though each secret delighted him. "Your Grace," he said softly, "the next stage is crucial. Prince Doran has proposed. That Trystane Martell be wed to Myrcella in the coming year, and that this union be recognized by the crown, an accelerated schedule that benefits both parties, so long as we hold up our end of the bargain. He also requests that your house publicly censure the Tyrells for their supposed part in Oberyn's downfall. He suggests unveiling certain letters that might incriminate Mace Tyrell in the events that led Oberyn to that trial by combat." Cersei folded her hands, tapping her fingers thoughtfully. "Letters? No doubt forged, but that hardly matters if the realm believes them. And how might we produce these letters? It seems Doran will provide them, or claim to have found them among Oberyn's personal effects. They will be damning, if we allow the rumor to flourish. This would incite a rift between House Tyrell and House Martell, turning Dorne's wrath away from us." Cersei allowed herself a faint smile. "Yes, an elegant plan. We must ensure the Tyrells have no time to mount a defense or see through the forgery. Once the accusations fly, their name will be stained, and we can stoke the fires of Dorne's hatred. With luck, the Martells will channel their resentment into direct action against the Tyrells." She paused, letting her mind wander through the potential outcomes. Chaos in the Reach, the Tyrells forced to battle a vengeful Dorne, or forced into humiliating submission. In either case, House Lannister gained breathing room to strengthen their hold. Qyburn cleared his throat. "We must be cautious, Your Grace. The Tyrells have many allies. Were they to suspect our involvement, we might face a dangerous confrontation in the capital." "Let them suspect," Cersei said with quiet venom. "So long as we keep them off balance, they will have no proof. By the time they realize the depth of our plan, it will be too late." Qyburn bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Cersei turned her gaze to a nearby window, where the moon hung pale above the city. "Send word to Prince Doran. Tell him we are prepared to move forward. The wedding between Myrcella and Trystane will be accelerated, with the crown's blessing. And we will coordinate with him on unveiling these forged letters." A cold gleam touched her eyes. "And do it discreetly, Qyburn. The Tyrells must remain ignorant for as long as possible." When next Margaery Tyrell ventured into the corridors, she felt as though every face she passed was turned away in secrecy. She caught a hush of conversation that stopped the moment she approached. She sensed eyes glancing at her, then darting away. Whatever Cersei was plotting, it had begun to seep through the fortress. She found Olenna in one of the smaller drawing rooms, sipping tea that had grown cold. The older woman looked up sharply as Margaery entered. "Ah, my darling granddaughter. Sit. There is much we need to discuss." Margaery took a seat on a cushioned bench across from Olenna, noticing how her grandmother's hands trembled slightly with frustration, or perhaps age. "You seem troubled, grandmother." Olenna made a dismissive gesture. "All this secrecy. The word is that Dorne is quite active in sending envoys to the capital. My own sources say that Trystane Martell's wedding to Myrcella Baratheon is to be moved up, a full year earlier than planned. Marjorie's eyebrows rose. A year earlier? That is sudden. Too sudden, Olenna snapped. It suggests a covert agreement. We Tyrells are not being consulted, which would be normal for any major alliance. The crown typically wants the support of the Reach, but not a word of it has come to us. Marjorie stiffened. So this is more than just a wedding. It's an alliance forming in secret, is it not? Likely. And if the Martells are aligning with the Lannisters, they might seek retribution for Prince Oberyn's death. Olenna's gaze sharpened on Marjorie. We know it was the Mountain who killed Oberyn under Lannister auspices, but rumors are malleable things. Perhaps Cersei is spinning a web to place the blame elsewhere. The moment Oberyn's paramour, Ilaria Sand, is convinced of another culprit, she'll sharpen 1,000 Dornish knives for that target. Marjorie pursed her lips, leaning forward. You think they intend to point those knives at us? She felt a chill at the idea of Dorne, with all its bitter vengeance, turning upon House Tyrell. Olenna's tone was clipped. Yes, that's precisely what I suspect. We must be ready for a storm of accusations. If the Martells claim we orchestrated Oberyn's death to bolster our standing with the crown, we might be forced into a precarious position. Marjorie's mind raced. We must prove such accusations false, or better yet, ensure they never gain traction. But how? Your wits, my dear, Olenna said bluntly, and your charm, and Loras's cunning. We cannot let them corner us unprepared. We must gather proof of the Lannisters' dealings with Dorne, or at the very least, glean enough to disrupt their plan. Marjorie nodded. I will do what I can. Tommen, perhaps I can speak to him. He's sweet if naive. If I approach him gently, maybe he'll confide in me. He is still a boy, after all. Olenna's mouth curved in a wry, grandmotherly half-smile. Yes, do try, but be careful not to arouse the lioness's wrath. She hovers over him like a hawk over a hare. If she suspects you're interrogating him, I know, Marjorie said quietly. She settled her hands in her lap, her posture poised. But we have little choice, do we? No, Olenna answered. Not if we want to keep the Tyrell name out of ruin. Tommen sat in the royal apartments with Ser Pounce curled in his lap, purring contentedly as the young king scratched behind the cat's ears. Marjorie entered and closed the door behind her, offering him a tender smile. My king, she greeted softly, inclining her head in a show of respect that was more affectionate than formal. Tommen blushed slightly. Despite being crowned king, he was still a boy in many ways, unaccustomed to the attention of a graceful woman like Marjorie. You needn't be so formal, my lady, he said shyly. Marjorie approached, her steps quiet upon the carpeted floor. Forgive me, she teased gently. It's so easy to forget that you're the king when I see you so at ease. He looked down at Ser Pounce. He helps me relax. Mother has been busy lately. She says I shouldn't worry about anything. Marjorie settled beside him, reaching out to stroke Ser Pounce's fur. And what do you think? Do you worry? Tommen glanced at her, his boyish face drawn. Sometimes. The city is calmer than during the war, but Mother says we must be careful. She's been talking a lot with Qyburn about something. I asked her once, and she told me it was grown-up business. Marjorie resisted the urge to press him further too quickly. She shaped her words carefully. We should be grateful she cares for your safety. But might you know if it has anything to do with Dorne? His eyes widened a little and he nodded. Yes, that. I overheard them mentioning Dorne. Mother got a letter from Uncle Kevin. They said something about the Tyrells, but I'm not sure what. Marjorie kept her expression calm, though her pulse quickened. I see. There have been rumors that the Martells are preparing to host a wedding sooner than expected. That your sister Myrcella might marry Trystane Martell by next spring. Tommen's face brightened momentarily. Myrcella wrote me. She said she's doing well, that she likes Trystane. Then his expression turned uncertain. But the wedding so soon? Mother hasn't told me about that. Marjorie considered her next words. Perhaps she was waiting for the proper moment. These alliances can be complicated. There might be politics involved, including talk about the Tyrells. Tommen looked troubled. Mother doesn't always trust your family. But he looked at Marjorie, his voice softer. I do. You're my queen, and you've always been nice to me. I don't want anyone to blame you for anything if something bad happens. Marjorie smiled warmly, placing a hand on his. I appreciate your trust, Tommen. It means the world to me. I only hope that, if Mother and Qyburn say things about my family, you will keep an open mind. Let me tell you the truth, if ever you have questions. He nodded, relief spreading across his young features. I will. Promise. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics for a time. Serpount's antics, Tommen's lessons with his tutors, but the kernel of truth had been planted. Marjorie left the royal apartments more certain than ever that Cersei was forging a dangerous alliance, and that she intended to scapegoat House Tyrell in the matter of Oberyn's death. Tommen's fleeting mention of "Mother says the Tyrells" lingered in her mind. She had to act before that vile rumor grew unstoppable. In Sunspear, Myrcella Baratheon stood on a high balcony overlooking the water gardens. Her golden hair fell in soft waves across her shoulders, catching the vibrant Dornish sunlight. Trystane Martell stood beside her, his dark curls framing an earnest face. He spoke gently about the intricacies of the garden's design, pointing out the patterns in the tiled fountains, each telling a story of Martell triumphs. She laughed quietly. I never realized so much thought went into fountains, she said, her voice lilting with genuine wonder. In King's Landing, most of our fountains are well decorative, not so elaborate in meaning. Trystane smiled, clearly pleased by her interest. Father says that in Dorne, water is precious. We celebrate it because it gives life to the desert. The mosaic designs reflect our history, how our ancestors forged a kingdom that resisted dragons and overcame adversity. Myrcella listened intently. She found Trystane to be kind, thoughtful, nothing like the monstrous tales about vengeful Dornishmen she'd sometimes heard from Lannister loyalists. He took her hand, guiding her closer to see the reflection of the sun in the water's surface. The closeness sent a small flutter through her. Here was a boy who would be her husband soon, if Mother's letters were to be believed. Myrcella recalled her mother's instructions. She felt a pang of unease each time she remembered. She had been told to sow suspicion, to carefully suggest that it was House Tyrell who orchestrated Oberyn's death, that Mace Tyrell or perhaps even Marjorie Tyrell had manipulated events from afar. But whenever Myrcella considered it, she felt guilty, for she had no proof, and she did not wish to be a liar. Yet her mother insisted. Family above all, the letter said. The Martells want justice. Give them a new target, one that helps us all. She inhaled, preparing herself. If she spoke carefully, perhaps she could fulfill her mother's wishes without betraying her own sense of honesty. Trystane, she began softly, as they paused by a tall palm tree that offered shade from the midday sun. I've been thinking about Prince Oberyn. I never met him, but I heard so many stories. A cloud passed over Trystane's face. He nodded. Yes, he was a great warrior, a true Dornishman in every sense. His death, it cut deeply, especially because no justice was done, or so our people believe. Myrcella pressed her lips together, feigning a look of thoughtful concern. I've heard talk in King's Landing, rumors that perhaps it wasn't simply House Lannister behind it, as many claimed, but others. Powerful houses. Maybe even the Tyrells. Trystane tilted his head, brow furrowing. The Tyrells? But why would they? I know they're wealthy, second only to the Lannisters in many respects. But what motive would they have to kill my uncle? Myrcella glanced away, as though troubled. I'm not certain. But from what I overheard, some say the Tyrells wanted to ensure Tyrion Lannister was found guilty, to weaken House Lannister after the war. Prince Oberyn was defending Tyrion. If Oberyn succeeded in that trial, Tyrion might have proven his innocence, and House Lannister would remain strong. Perhaps the Tyrells didn't want that. She felt her heart hammering at the deception, her cheeks burning with shame, but she pressed on. seeing the confusion in Tristane's eyes shift to contemplation. If he believed her, perhaps Mother would be pleased. Tristane exhaled slowly. It does sound plausible in a twisted way. The Tyrells have grown very influential. If they orchestrated some scheme to see Oberyn killed, then they have the perfect scapegoat in the Lannisters. Everyone believes it was your family who arranged it. Myrcella quickly added, I'm not accusing them outright. I've heard these whispers, and it pains me to think someone else might be at fault while my family takes all the blame. She offered him a gentle, apologetic smile. I wanted you to know there could be another perspective. Tristane nodded, his gaze drifting to the bright gardens below. I wish it weren't so complicated. Sometimes I think how wonderful it would be if we could just live in peace. He turned back to her, a longing in his dark eyes. When we're married, maybe we can build a bridge between our houses, show the realm that hatred can end. Myrcella's chest constricted with emotion. She wanted to believe in that future. She wanted to be the bright hope that banished old grudges. But her mother's letters reminded her that illusions of peace often served as stepping stones to further power. She squeezed Tristane's hand. I hope so, she whispered, meaning it sincerely. In that moment, the pang of guilt for her small untruths grew heavier. Yet she remembered Cersei's letter, the promise that this was for the good of House Lannister. And Myrcella, as a princess, must serve that end. Night fell over King's Landing in a haze of torchlit streets and shadows that clung to every alley. Within the Red Keep, the Great Hall stood nearly empty save for a few guards posted at its perimeter. Late-night hush permeated the corridors, allowing the soft echo of bootsteps to carry farther than usual. Cersei stood alone near the Iron Throne, gazing up at it with an expression torn between admiration and resentment. The metal seat was forged from the swords of vanquished enemies, a seat that had cut many a king or queen who foolishly forgot the throne was not theirs to own, but to borrow. Joffrey's memory lingered in the steel. Sometimes she thought she could hear the faint clang of ghosts within it. Kevan Lannister approached from the side, clearing his throat gently to announce his presence. He was a man of measured steps, always mindful of courtesy. Cersei, he greeted, dispensing with titles in this private space. You wanted to see me? She turned, nodding. Yes, uncle. I have news regarding our arrangement with Dorne. Kevin's expression tightened. He was not entirely fond of her secret dealings. I heard rumors that the Martells aim to move up Tristane's wedding to Myrcella. Is that your doing? Cersei's mouth curved in a slight smile. It was Prince Doran's suggestion, but I pressed for it. The faster the union is sealed, the more swiftly we gain Dorne's support. They will do their part in turning suspicion upon the Tyrells for Oberyn's death. Kevin's brow furrowed. Are you certain that is wise? The Tyrells are our allies by the king's marriage. We risk provoking a major conflict. Would you prefer Marjorie keep her claws around Tommen's throat, shaping him into a puppet for House Tyrell's ambitions? Cersei retorted. No, we must weaken them now before they grow too bold. Once they are discredited, seen as traitors who conspired to kill Prince Oberyn, we can overshadow them at court. Kevin exhaled, looking up at the imposing silhouette of the Iron Throne. You are playing a dangerous game, niece. If the Tyrells suspect our hand in this, it could lead to civil war. Better a small war now than total subjugation later, she replied coldly. We are Lannisters. The realm belongs to us, not to a house of upstart gardeners. She paused, softening her tone. But I understand your concern. This must be handled delicately, with no direct ties to us. Doran Martell will present his forged evidence, and we will feign shock, while offering him every courtesy to punish House Tyrell. We do nothing openly except, perhaps, support Dorne's claims. Kevin's gaze flicked to the white-cloaked guards in the shadows, verifying their distance. And if the Reach rises in defense of the Tyrells? Cersei's jaw tightened. We have the gold, the city, and Dorne at our backs. The Tyrell bannermen might question Mace Tyrell's judgment if they believe him guilty of such a heinous act. They'll be divided. That division will be our strength. She watched Kevin's reaction carefully. Finally, he nodded, though reluctance pinched the corners of his mouth. Very well. I only pray this doesn't end in more bloodshed than we can handle. Blood will always be shed, Cersei said, a hint of sorrow beneath her steel. But so long as it's not ours, we can endure. When the news broke in King's Landing that Trystane Martell and Myrcella Baratheon's nuptials were set for the following spring, mere months away, shock rippled through the court. Margaery Tyrell learned of it from a minor lord, who seemed all too pleased to gossip about the Queen Mother's private announcement. The wedding was to be celebrated in the water gardens of Dorne, with a smaller feast later at the capital. Also sudden, people muttered, "Why the rush?" Margaery quickly found Loras, who was training in the courtyard with a few of his fellow knights. She beckoned him aside, ignoring the sweat glistening on his brow. He donned a cloak over his practice leathers and followed her to a corner shielded from prying eyes. "It's official," she said in a low voice, her worry evident. "They've made the announcement. I fear what will come next." Loras nodded, panting slightly from his exertions. "We need to confirm the scale of this alliance. If the Martells have truly sided with the Lannisters, they might aim to discredit us." Margaery grimaced, eyes darting over Loras's shoulder to ensure no eavesdroppers. "We must find out what Cersei has promised them. The entire city is buzzing with rumor. Some claim that House Martell has proof we orchestrated Oberyn's death. It's nonsense, but rumor is rarely bound by truth." Loras's voice hardened. "If that rumor spreads, many in the realm might believe it. Oberyn was beloved, not just in Dorne. The idea that we arranged his death, it could ruin us." Margaery nodded grimly. "Grandmother is meeting with certain lords who favor us, trying to shore up our allies. We need a different angle, something to reveal the falsehood of these accusations. Or to reveal a deeper conspiracy, preferably with evidence." Loras set his jaw in determination. "Leave that to me. I'll see if I can gain access to Qyburn's private chambers or intercept any ravens bound for Dorne. If they have a paper trail, we might find it." Margaery rested a hand on his shoulder, giving him a firm look. "Be careful, Loras. Cersei has eyes everywhere. If we're caught spying, it might only confirm any falsehoods she chooses to spread." "I will be careful," he assured her. "We must protect our family." She squeezed his shoulder, then turned away, that haunted sense of uncertainty once again filling her. House Tyrell had always used its wealth and cunning to ascend in the realm's politics. Now, if they couldn't halt Cersei's conspiracy, that ascendancy might come crashing down. The day was scorching hot in Sunspear, the sun glaring off pale stone towers and shimmering upon the turquoise waters that stretched to the horizon. Doran Martell met with Ilaria Sand in a shaded courtyard, where a slight breeze offered the barest relief. They spoke quietly, leaning close so that wandering ears might not catch their words. "It is all arranged," Doran said, reading from a fresh letter in his hands. "Cersei has agreed to every stipulation. The wedding will be soon, and the crown will not refute any claims we make regarding Prince Oberyn's death. She suggests we reveal the forged letters before the wedding, stoking public outrage. Then, at the wedding, we present our official condemnation of House Tyrell. She wants the entire realm to witness it." Ilaria's lips thinned. "She certainly wants a spectacle, doesn't she?" "She does," Doran replied. "But so do I. If the realm sees that House Tyrell orchestrated Oberyn's end, they will lose face. Perhaps they will be forced to kneel or lose their influence. Then Dorne might finally see the justice Oberyn deserved." He paused, glancing at Ilaria. "You are certain you wish to follow this path? You were closest to Oberyn. His daughters, your daughters, bear the name Sand, but they burn with anger. This will be a blow to the Tyrells if it goes as planned." Ilaria's eyes flared with a measure of anger. "If it punishes those truly responsible. But are we sure the Tyrells were truly behind it?" Doran considered carefully. "It is possible the Tyrells had no hand in Oberyn's death. The mountain did the deed that we know. But if turning our wrath upon the Tyrells furthers Dorne's position and avenges us by proxy, Then so be it. The Lannisters are not innocent, but at least they have offered an olive branch and compensation for Oberyn's demise. The Tyrells have done nothing for us. Why not accept Cersei's arrangement? Illyria's voice caught slightly. She stared at Dorne as though seeking the last vestige of moral clarity in a sea of political expedients. I loved Oberyn, she whispered. I want his spirit to rest. If forging these letters and condemning the Tyrells will ease the rage in our people, maybe I can sleep at night. She exhaled. So be it. We will do as you say. Dorne pressed her hand gently. We do this for Dorne, for Oberyn's daughters, too. They will have a future if we maintain peace with the crown. A tenuous peace, but one that grants us power in the capital. Illyria closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, the softness gone. Yes, for Dorne. They stood in silence for a moment, the dryness of the air like a tangible force. Then Dorne sent for a scribe, instructing them to prepare an official statement that would be held until the right moment. In it, House Martell would declare they had uncovered proof that House Tyrell orchestrated Oberyn's murder. With careful forging of dates and signatures, they would present the letters that Dorne claimed to have found among Oberyn's possessions. The trap was set. Inside the Red Keep's labyrinthine halls, Loras Tyrell moved under the cover of night. He wore a simple tunic and cloak rather than his Kingsguard armor, using the knowledge gleaned from guards he trusted to navigate around patrols. His destination, Qyburn's workshop, a place rumored to be filled with strange experiments and darker curiosities. The torch sconces along the walls sputtered as he slipped down a spiral stair. Furtiveness twisted his gut with tension. He was a Tyrell, not a common thief. But for the sake of his family, he would do what was needed. As a skilled knight, he at least had the advantage of stealth and discipline. Reaching the door, he found it locked. He pulled a slim dagger from his belt, carefully maneuvering it into the latch. His attempts at lockpicking were crude, but after several tense moments, a soft click rewarded him. He eased the door open, stepping into Qyburn's domain. A wave of unsettling smells assailed him. A mixture of sour chemicals, old blood, and something akin to rotting herbs. The workshop was cluttered with tables of oddities. Glass beakers, caged ravens, half-dissected creatures preserved in jars of cloudy liquid. Loras fought down a surge of revulsion. Instead, he focused on scanning the shelves for scrolls, letters, anything that might pertain to the alliance with Dorne. The flicker of candlelight danced along the walls as he lifted a small lantern. He found a stack of papers on a desk, half covered by a ragged cloth. Sorting through them, he discovered mostly medical notes. An anatomical sketch of a human arm, a treatise on venomous snakes. But then he noticed a letter addressed to Qyburn from a certain A.L., with the golden lion seal. L likely stood for Ardrian Lannister or another lesser cousin. Loras carefully unfolded the parchment, scanning the lines. It spoke of safe passage for a Dornish envoy, references to a secret arrangement, and mention of forging letters to implicate House Tyrell. His heart hammered. This was it, proof that something foul was afoot. He read further, trying to memorize its details. The letter was short, perhaps a response to Qyburn's queries, referencing that the Queen Regent will finalize negotiations once the Tyrell threat is neutralized. That was enough for Loras. He felt a surge of triumph even as anxiety coiled in his stomach. If he took the letter, Qyburn might notice its absence. But if he left it, he'd have no evidence. He needed a copy, at least. He rummaged in a drawer, finding ink and a scrap of parchment. With the speed born of desperation, he copied the contents as best he could. The words were scrawled in a hurried script, but it would suffice. Once he finished, he set the letter back where he found it, carefully arranging the cloth to conceal the intrusion. He stuffed his copy under his cloak and prepared to leave. As he turned, a figure loomed in the doorway. His lantern light cast a tall shadow on the floor. For a split second, Loras's body froze with terror. Had Qyburn caught him? "Who's there?" came a raspy voice. Loras's training snapped to the fore. He dropped the lantern and lunged forward, tackling the figure to the ground before they could cry out further. It was a young assistant, perhaps an acolyte of Qyburn. They struggled, but Loras pinned them, placing a hand over their mouth. "I'll release you," he whispered fiercely. "If you remain silent, I have no wish to harm you." The assistant's eyes were wild, but they nodded jerkily. Loras eased his grip, stepping back while keeping his dagger at the ready. "This never happened," he warned, voice low. "Speak of it, and you'll regret it." Fear glimmered in the assistant's eyes. They remained silent. Loras, satisfied that they would not raise an alarm, slipped through the door and vanished into the dark corridors. His heart pounded in his ears as he wove a meandering path back to his quarters, breath coming quick. Once inside the relative safety of his chamber, he bolted the door. Then, trembling slightly, he withdrew the copied letter and read it under a single candle's flame. The words were clear. House Lannister and House Martell had conspired to produce false documents incriminating House Tyrell in Oberyn's murder. It was precisely the kind of evidence Margaery needed. But how to use it? If they presented it publicly, Cersei would dismiss it as a forgery, ironically turning the tables. They needed a dramatic moment, a time when no one could ignore the truth. Perhaps at Myrcella's wedding, the entire realm's eyes would be on that event. If, at that precise moment, the Tyrells exposed the conspiracy, it might unravel the alliance. Loras sank onto his bed. Yes, that would be the plan. He'd show this to Margaery and Olenna, and together they'd decide the best course. House Tyrell would not go down easily, not while there was breath in their lungs and cunning in their minds. In the weeks that followed, tensions rose in the capital as the date of Myrcella and Trystane's wedding drew nearer. The Tyrells feigned polite smiles, continued orchestrating royal feasts, and busied themselves with preparations for Tommen's name-day celebrations. Cersei pretended to be cordial, though her eyes glinted with malice each time she crossed paths with Margaery. At last, the day arrived for the royal party to travel south to Dorne, for the wedding that would unite House Lannister and House Martell officially. The roads leading from King's Landing to the Boneway were guarded by mixed forces. Lannister soldiers, Dornish escorts, and even a handful of Tyrell bannermen to maintain appearances. Margaery, Tommen, and a portion of the royal court accompanied Cersei's retinue, though Olenna politely declined to travel, feigning ill health. In truth, she remained in the capital to coordinate any last-minute plans. The journey was long and hot, especially once they crossed into the Dornish marches. Margaery rode in a lacquered carriage with Tommen, ensuring the young king was comfortable. Cersei rode in a separate carriage, flanked by a small squad of the Kingsguard, with Jaime Lannister conspicuously absent, still away on other tasks. Loras traveled as part of the retinue, along with many other knights. At night, when the party made camp, Margaery and Loras spoke in hushed tones by the flicker of firelight, finalizing their strategy. Loras had shown her the letter, and they had agreed to wait until the wedding feast to reveal it. That was the moment Dorne planned to unleash their accusations against the Tyrells, so it would be the perfect time to turn it back on them. They could only hope that the ruse would succeed, for if it failed, they risked incurring the wrath of both Dorne and the Lannisters in a single stroke. At Sunspear, Myrcella paced in a sumptuous chamber set aside for her wedding preparations. The dress, a flowing gown of pale gold with delicate embroidery, lay draped over a seat. Servants flitted about, fussing over every detail. She felt as though the walls were closing in. Soon she would be wed. Perhaps part of her welcomed it, for she did have fondness for Trystane. Yet she was uneasy. She had received a recent letter from Cersei reminding her not to waver in casting suspicion upon the Tyrells if the subject arose. A gentle knock at the door roused her from her reverie. Illyria Sand entered, accompanied by one of the Sand Snakes. Tyene, if Myrcella remembered correctly. "Forgive the intrusion," Illyria said with a slight bow. "I wanted to check on you, to see if everything is as you wish for tomorrow." Myrcella forced a polite smile. "Yes, thank you. The seamstresses have done a lovely job." She glanced at Tyene, who stood quietly, her eyes watchful. "Is there something else I can do for you?" Illyria exchanged a look with Tyene, then approached Myrcella. We wanted to ensure you understood that tomorrow's ceremony is not merely a wedding, but a statement. Dorne has decided to accept the crown's overtures in good faith. But many in Dorne are still angry. They want proof that Oberyn's death has not been forgotten. Myrcella's stomach tightened. She nodded slowly. I understand. I never wished for Prince Oberyn's death. Tyene spoke up, her tone soft but firm. We know, Princess. Yet if your mother and Prince Doran have agreed to place the blame elsewhere, we expect you to support that. Myrcella swallowed. Yes, of course. I will not contradict my mother. She hesitated, tears threatening to well in her eyes. But I worry. The Tyrells. I do not know that they are truly to blame. It feels so cruel to accuse them without certain proof. Ilaria and Tyene shared a glance. Ilaria's voice softened. This is the way of power, child. We do not always have the luxury of moral certainty. Sometimes we must do what is necessary for our house, for the greater good of our people. Dorne has suffered. If placing blame on the Tyrells helps us heal, many will accept it. Myrcella forced the tears down, nodding shakily. I suppose so. Ilaria touched her arm gently. Rest, Princess. Tomorrow is a big day. She and Tyene departed, leaving Myrcella alone with her doubts and the weight of her mother's expectations. The wedding day dawned hot and bright, with a relentless sun overhead. The water gardens teemed with color and vibrancy. Banners of House Martell fluttering in the breeze, gaily dressed courtiers from across Westeros milling about. A smaller contingent of Tyrell supporters had arrived with Margaery and Loras, while Lannister men in polished armor lined the walkways. Myrcella stood at the far end of the garden, beneath a canopy of woven palm fronds. Trystane waited for her, resplendent in Dornish finery. The officiant, a solemn-faced priest of the Seven, raised his arms to begin the ceremony. Petals scattered across the water's surface in the reflecting pools, and the gathered crowd fell quiet. Cersei stood among the front row of dignitaries, her golden hair pinned high, her expression cool with triumph. She occasionally glanced at Margaery, who stood with Tommen near the dais. Margaery met her gaze with perfect composure, though her heart drummed a furious rhythm. As the ceremony progressed, Myrcella and Trystane exchanged their vows, speaking words of union between Dorne and the crown. Applause and cheers rose, echoing through the gardens. Yet beneath it, tension coiled like a viper ready to strike. This was the moment Margaery knew, when House Martell would reveal their accusations. Sure enough, once the vows concluded and the cheering subsided, Prince Doran rolled forward in his wheeled chair, flanked by Ilaria Sand and the Sand Snakes. He raised a hand for silence, and the crowd stilled. My beloved people of Dorne, lords and ladies of Westeros, he began, voice carrying with unexpected resonance. Today, we celebrate this union between our houses, yet I must speak of old wounds. The death of my brother, Prince Oberyn Martell, still weighs heavily upon our hearts. A ripple of murmurs passed among the onlookers. Loras quietly placed a hand on the hilt of his sword, a gesture more symbolic than threatening. Margaery felt Tommen shift nervously at her side. Doran continued, For so long, we believed Oberyn's death laid at the hands of a single man, Ser Gregor Clegane, championing for House Lannister. But new evidence has come to light, letters discovered among Prince Oberyn's effects. He held up a bundle of parchment. These letters implicate another house, one that conspired to ensure Prince Oberyn's downfall, House Tyrell. Gasps rippled through the garden. Cersei wore a mask of feigned shock, her eyes flicking over to see Margaery's reaction. The Tyrell knights bristled, some stepping forward in protest. Margaery lifted her chin, but did not speak yet. She knew the next step was crucial. Doran's voice rose. It is written here that Mace Tyrell sought to protect his daughter's future marriage to King Tommen by guaranteeing Lord Tyrion Lannister's conviction, thus removing a potential threat to the crown. Prince Oberyn, defending Tyrion, stood in the way. So they arranged for the Mountain to fight, for events to favor a certain outcome. The Tyrells orchestrated my brother's murder from behind the scenes, all to increase their hold on the throne. The hush was broken by outraged cries. Some looked at Marjorie with hostility, others in disbelief. Tommen turned wide, anxious eyes upon her. Now was the moment. Marjorie stepped forward, raising her voice. "These accusations are false," she declared, her tone resonant. "I swear it on the honor of my house, and by the Seven. House Tyrell had no hand in Prince Oberyn's death." "Then explain these letters," Ilaria Sand shouted, seizing the parchments from Doran's hand and thrusting them up for all to see. "We have proof." Marjorie lifted a hand, beckoning Loras. Her brother stepped forward, producing his own parchment. "And we have proof of a conspiracy," he said, voice firm. He held the paper high, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "This letter, penned by a Lannister agent to Qyburn, details the plan to forge letters implicating House Tyrell and deliver them to House Martell in order to deflect blame from the true culprits." A sudden roar of commotion. Cersei's eyes blazed with fury. Doran stared in confusion. Ilaria faltered. The crowd erupted into a storm of accusations and questions. Which letter was real? Which was forged? People demanded to see them both. Loras strode forward, handing his copy to a nearby noble who often served as a neutral arbiter in such disputes, Lord Giles of Rosby. Doran extended his own letters. There, before the heated gazes of the crowd, the two sets of documents were compared. Shouting intensified as some recognized the mismatch of seals, the suspicious timing, the clashing details. Marjorie used the opportunity to appeal directly to Prince Doran. "You have been misled," she said, stepping close enough that her voice carried to him and those nearby. "Whatever those letters say, you must see that the Lannisters are the ones who benefit from this blame. My brother discovered a communication from the Crown's own agent, Qyburn, describing how these forgeries would be planted." Doran's face twisted with uncertainty. Ilaria looked as though the ground had been pulled from under her. Meanwhile, Cersei strode forward, her posture rigid with anger. She snatched one of the alleged forged letters from Lord Giles' hands. "This is a lie," she hissed, though her voice trembled. "The Tyrells have devised this ruse to shift guilt away from themselves." A swirl of voices rose. The Martell retinue, the Lannister guards, the Tyrell knights. The entire scene teetered on the edge of chaos. Prince Doran raised a hand for silence. "Stop," he commanded, voice strained. The watchers fell into a tense hush. He turned to Marjorie. "If these claims of forging are true, where is the original letter from Qyburn?" Loras stepped forward, meeting Doran's gaze. "I found it in Qyburn's chambers, but could not take it without revealing myself. I copied it by hand." He handed the letter to Doran. "You'll note the references to forging, referencing the Queen's instruction to shift blame for the trial by combat. The name of the scribe is indicated by initials at the bottom. You can have the scribes verify the penmanship. They'll confirm it was Qyburn's own writing." Ilaria's glare turned on Cersei, who stood white-faced, lips pressed tight. Marjorie saw the flicker of panic in the Queen Regent's eyes. If there was an official scribe's signature, verifying Qyburn's identity, it might be enough to cast serious doubt on the Martell letters. Trystane, stepping beside Myrcella, spoke up, his voice trembling with emotion. "Father, we cannot proceed with these accusations unless we are certain. Let the scribes examine both sets of letters. If we have been deceived..." He trailed off, turning a pained look on Myrcella. She looked back at him with shimmering eyes, torn between loyalty to her mother and the guilt of a hidden truth. Doran's fists clenched on the arms of his chair. "So be it," he said in a strained voice. "I will not let Dorne be made a fool. If these letters are false, we must know." "Then we wait," Marjorie said, seizing the moment. "Let the scribes examine them. Let them confirm the authenticity, both of your letters and ours. Until then, we do not hurl blame, lest the wedding feast be stained with blood instead of wine." The tension hovered for a long moment, thick as the Dornish heat. Finally, with a curt nod from Doran, the letters were handed to a group of scribes, who scurried away to compare seals, signatures, penmanship. The entire assembly stood in uneasy clusters, whispering fiercely. Myrcella clung to Tristane's arm, while Cersei glowered in a corner, clearly furious to have been so publicly challenged. Marjorie maintained a haughty composure, though inside, her nerves jangled. If the scribes saw any inconsistency in Loras's letter, the Tyrells would be doomed. But she trusted her brother's skill in copying the original carefully, and she knew the scribes might also find inconsistencies in the letters offered by House Martell. One truth was certain: the wedding had been overshadowed by this scandal. The alliance that Cersei and Dorne sought to solidify was already riven with doubt. The game continued, and no matter who emerged the victor, the seeds of distrust had been sown among the most powerful houses in Westeros. Time would tell how the realm would realign. For now, Marjorie Tyrell and Cersei Lannister stood at opposite ends of the garden, locked in a silent stare, each knowing that only one of them could come out on top of this precarious new balance of power.